Today we're going to look at square and square roots. Now, we have a perfect square, and this is just the square of an integer. Remember those positive and negative whole numbers. For example, 3 squared is 9, and the number 9 is going to be our perfect square. A square root is a number that, when multiplied by itself, equals the given number. So, this sign right here is the square root sign that we use, and we call it a radical. What goes under the square root sign is what we call the radicand. So, something a little new that you haven't probably remembered before, but every positive number is going to have 2 square roots, not just 1. It's going to have 1 positive square root and 1 negative. Now the positive square root has a special name. We call that the principal square root. So square root of 16 is 4, since 4 squared equals 16. And the square root of 16 is also negative 4, since negative 4 squared equals 16. Remember also, when you're putting it into your calculator, you must put parentheses around the negative number. If you don't, you will get a negative 16 versus a 16. Now remember, without the parentheses, you will not get the correct answer with your calculator. Now the principal square root of the square root of 16 is going to be 4. It's the positive root. So, when you're doing problems, when you just see the radical sign, only this, it's asking for the principal square root, which is the positive root. So the square root of 4 is 2. That is your principal root. When you have a plus and a minus outside the radical sign, it's asking for both roots, both the positive and negative root. So the plus or minus square root of 4 equals 2 and negative 2. Now, when there's a negative sign outside the radical, that means it only wants the negative root. So we do negative square root of 4, which is negative 2. So, for example, if you have the opposite, the square root of 9, it wants the negative root, so that's going to be a negative 3. If you just have the square root of 1.44, it wants the principal square root, which is the positive root, and that's 1.2. Now, if you have a fraction like this, the square root of 25 over 4, what this is saying is the square root of 25 over the square root of 4. When you do that, you take the square root of each number, and notice we had no negative sign or positive sign outside of the radical, so it's the principal root. So the square root of 25 is 5, and the square root of 4 is 2. And your answer is going to be 5/2. Number 4, we have plus minus the square root of 49. That means it wants both roots. So that's going to be a positive 7 and a negative 7. And sometimes, to do it short and quick to write it, we do a plus minus. That means it's the positive 7 and the negative 7. It's just a quick way to write it. Alright, not all squares are going to be perfect squares. Some are going to be irrational numbers. Remember, irrational numbers are numbers that cannot be expressed in a fraction. They're non-ending, and they don't ever repeat, and they're decimals. So, like the square root of 2 equals 1.414213562, and it keeps going and going. Now that is an irrational number. It's not going to be a perfect square. So we sometimes estimate our square roots, meaning we like to pick what 2 consecutive integers does the square root fall between. So, for this one, we want to look at what 2 integers does the square root of 17 fall between. And what you're going to do is find your perfect squares on either side. Now, 16 is a perfect square, And the next one after 17 is 25. So the square root of 16 is 4, and the square root of 25 is 5. That means the square root of 17 must be somewhere between 4 and 5. And that's your answer. Just saying that the square root of 17 is between 4 and 5. Let's try another one. Let's look at what two consecutive integers does the square root of 130 fall between. So, two perfect squares on either side of 130 is going to be 121 and 144. Now, the square root of 121 is 11, and the square root of 144 is 12. 11 and 12 are consecutive integers. That means the square root of 130 is going to fall between 11 and 12. And that is your answer. Alright, let's look at it the easy way, using our calculator. Now there's some buttons that you've got to push in order to get the correct answer. Now we want to know what the square root of 17 is. We do know it's between 4 and 5, like we did in the previous example. So you're going to hit the second button, followed by x squared. If you notice, above that x squared is a radical symbol. Then you're going to hit 1, 7, because we're entering the number 17. You're going to close those parentheses. If you noticed after you hit the radical sign, you had an open parenthesis. And now you need to close that. Then hit enter. When you do that, you come up with this long number. That's an irrational number. So we're going to round it to the nearest hundredths. That's 2 decimal places. So we look at our 2 and we look at our 3. Now our 3 is not greater than 5, so I don't do anything to my 2. So my answer is 4.12. That's an estimate of what the square root of 17 is. So let's do the square root of 124. You hit second, x squared. This time instead of 1, 7, you're going to put in 1, 2, 4. So for 124. Close your parentheses and hit enter. When you do that, you get this long number again, which is an irrational number, so we're going to round it to the nearest hundredth place. Hundredths would be this 3. Now let's look at the place before it, which is 5, right here. This number is equal to or greater than 5, because it's 5. So that means I take my 3 and I round it up 1 to 4. So my answer is going to be 11.14. And that's all you have to do. And you're estimating exactly what the square root of 124 is.